that on behalf of the colleagues from the other universities who cannot be with us today, I think I'm the only one representative from the other universities from Germany. I would like to say a big thank you to our hosts, to our organizers. I organized summer schools as well, and I know it's a lot of work. It's really hard work. And my present doesn't look so nice, but actually it's more than this. It's a box, but I couldn't just carry it, so I handed it over to another time. So again, thank you so much for doing all these, for organizing everything. I think it was really the summer school to remember very well. And for 2 weeks we organized the whole program. So thank you so much from my side as well.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was very nice to make that speech. And now I think that we can move to the culmination point. Yes?
Because not all of us participated in the opening of this summer school. So I have to be fair, I have to add that this idea was worked out in Landau. Honestly, was set up, was invented in Landau, in the garden, in Professor Zigmar's garden, with Dr. Michał Jacoński, and of course it was successfully developed by Anna Radłowska, who contributed much to this project, to the very first version of this application. So we should remember this, and thank you for all that were involved in preparing this whole project. Thank you very much.
So thank you. I would like to welcome all those of you who just arrived. So thank you for coming, and I hope that you will enjoy. So now we move to the culmination point of this whole day. And I would like to introduce an honorable guest, Professor Klaus von Weinmann, who will talk now about the transformation, about politics and economics in Eastern Europe. Thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, pragnę serdecznie podziękować za to tak miłe zaproszenie do miasta, dla mnie ważnego miasta mojej młodości. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel somewhat uneasy to talk after having listened to all your wonderful presentations of the groups. Now we turn back to rather general indicators, but you have been digging already into the details. But maybe my presentation would have been better at the beginning, and I feel uneasily that I do it at the end, but nevertheless we have to support 4 chapters I would like to deal with you. The concept of transitology, second, quantitative studies of transition, third, civil society and justice as normative concepts and indicators for failures of consolidation. And fourth, economic development orientation towards the EU and corruption in East Central Europe. Turning to the first point, concept of transitology. Transitology became a kind of catchword after the breakdown of communism, as it had been for egalitarianism before, and later it may be terrorism. One of the most important notions was effective democracy as a concept which linked it somehow to traditional comparative politics. Today, as far as I can see, transitology is withering away, and its concepts are integrated into business as usual and into normal science, and will feel reinforced by your presentations, which I just listened to. Political science, under the impact of rational choice, which have comfort the American political science departments in developing away from historical and institutional studies, entering quantitative research after the model of economic departments. In contrast to former modernization theories, the emphasis is no longer predominantly on economic variables. Philip Schmitter, for instance, adopted from economics the term embedded democracy. Recent economic studies also discovered that the other subsystems of society have to be analyzed in order to come to fair conclusions on transformation. Democracy has to be embedded into a functioning economy and a culture and religion which is not hostile against democratic values. It sounds, however, quite unpopular if I try to outline that your former systems, namely communism, had some virtues for this kind of transition. So you did a better job than many other countries in the third world, especially in Africa. And the unpopular virtues of former communist regimes were that there was a high level of education, which you inherited. Communism has pushed secularization. Third, it has tamed the military. Even Russia nowadays suffers because of many things, but not of the dominance of the military, as for instance in this moment Egypt. And the research on corruption in the former Soviet Union, however, considered mafia structures of the oligarchs as a kind of functional equivalent to the enclaves which have been found in many other transitional societies. Putin's way of getting away with the oligarchs makes it likely that the enclaves wither away, which does not necessarily, however, increase democracy and avoid corruption, but concentrates various elements more visibly in political matters. Communism, however, brutally did away with former classes such as the farming class. In terms of party systems, the result in Eastern Europe is striking. The Hungarian party of small landholders between the wars was about 60% of the votes. It failed, however, after the breakdown of communism. On the other hand, you have Poland with several peasants' parties. That's the only country which did not do away with the farming class. But I think for the further development of Poland, this was not only a virtue. The small landholders are still a problem in Poland, including the about 20% of the workforce and poisoning of political party systems by various groups of the farmers. The legacy of former systems have been discovered as being important. And it is, if political science normally sticks to past development, because you cannot think something and you get it, that normally developments are somehow dependent on the past in the former times. We have even to see the differences of communist regimes in former times. There was the bureaucratic authoritarian communism, which collapsed. There was a national accommodative communism, and third, a kind of patrimonial communism. All the former Soviet states, plus Romania and Albania, I would subsummarize here. They made a very important difference for the development of the system. Mixes of two systems, sometimes as the Baltic republics or Slovakia, apparently had some successful impact on the further development. Only national accommodative communism did better. The Czech Republic, however, was a different case. The bureaucratic authoritarian type collapsed to such an extent that it turned over more quickly to sustainable democracy than patrimonial communism, if I'm right. However, the problem is of how to co-opt new elites. My second chapter would be the quantitative studies of transition to democracy, various sets of indicators for the legal and constitutional state have been put forward. Transparency International included even variables which seem to be far away from political questions, such as the development of the reform of penal law or the impact of corruption on the economy. The democracy score for nations in transition in 2004 included variables such as the electoral process, civil society, independent media, governance, constitutional framework, and last but not least, corruption. The most recent ranking for nations in transit, listed in the table which we have here, has a kind of sequence which is somehow better than it used to be in former groups of indicators. Poland is now on top, followed by Slovenia and Estonia. This is in tune with other surveys, especially concerning the Czech Republic. That the only country with a democratic experience between the two world wars and before 45 should rank below Latvia, as it did in some earlier surveys, is not very believable. Maybe the criticism against Prague was very much poisoned by their treatment of the gypsies, and this spoiled the positive results on Czech democratic performance at a certain time. Whereas Estonia and Latvia successfully pretended to have improved their relations with their minorities, namely the Russians. The distorting impact of different indicators is visible when we compare several studies. The Bertelsmann Index, and now it's the next table, page number 4. For democracies and autocracies is less so. Slovenia, the Czech Republic, Estonia and Hungary were now on top. Latvia went further down than Botswana and ranked between Bulgaria and Romania. The effective democracies in Eastern Europe which remained were Albania, Ukraine and Mongolia. Russia and Moldavia ranked strongly effective democracies below Sri Lanka or Blanda. Belarus was not even given the title for a moderate autocracy. This has obviously changed into transformation indices which were coming later. The Freedom House democracy source and score of 2004 has still another version. The notion of consolidation is applied to authoritarian systems as well. Whereas the rankings in Wolfgang Merkel's books and his school still suggest that there's some hope for improvement, the Freedom House Index puts it bluntly. Lasciata ogni speranza voi che entrate, which is the inscription over the entrance of the hell, leave all hopes to those who enter here. Because it is the entrance from the hell. And they said that some Central Asia former Soviet republics and Belarus are consolidated authoritarian democracies, and Russia was the only country which still had a slight chance in those indicators set to improve. These striking differences in the rankings, and now you please show table 1, which were published at the same time to warn us of artificial hierarchies to take them for granted. In each ranking, we know that also in our countries, if rankings are done, for instance, on universities, that they change very quickly from one year to the other. My University of Heidelberg is on top 1 year, and 2 years afterwards, it can be already much more below. It can be downward. Moreover, small groups of indicators distort their results. We have the problem that some kind of regimes were not really properly defined. Russia, for instance, has anocracy, by Americans call a mixture of anarchy and autocracy. This was okay at the time of Yeltsin, because you had both elements, but it did no longer work as soon as Putin took over. Poland at that time seemed to rank far below Hungary and the Czech Republic. This has improved, fortunately. But it was a time when Wałęsa increasingly interfered into the process in a rather authoritarian way. Later, his follower, President Kwasniewski, was a good example, also as a president elected by the people, but somehow behaving like an Austrian president, not very much interfering into the day-to-day life of politics. There are, of course, a lot of hybrid systems, and some of them are called anocracies. The more we know about this development, the more we know that institutional stability is not always given. But the comparison of various indices shows that certain developments, some regimes in Southeast Europe were upgraded, such as Bulgaria, Latvia, and Romania. Hungary, however, showed a relative decline in the era of Orban, and Russia was listed among the highly effective democracy, and probably next time will be inserted under moderate autocracy. Hungary was drastically downgraded due to Orban's government's restrict new media legislation, for instance. In Ukraine, industrialists close to the government-owned major media holdings and two oppositional TV broadcasters were stripped out of their frequencies. The multitude of restrictions on freedom of expression has fallen from 9.2 in 2006 to 7.8 in 2012. Authoritarian regression is frequently promoted under the guise of populism. Gains and losses in the rule of law from 2008 to 2012 are considerable in the fields of separations of power, especially in Ukraine. Independent judiciary, again, -2 for the Ukraine. Civil rights, minus Georgia and Kyrgyzstan, whereas Turkey showed an improvement, +1. The rankings of 2010 became much more sophisticated than they were originally. The 2012 on economic transformation, if you now show us the management of table 3, then you find that the Czech Republic now was on top, above Taiwan, followed by Slovenia and the Baltic republics. Russia and Ukraine, China, were listed among market economies with functional growth, and Belarus remained a poorly functioning market economy. The good message was that no East European country was only a rudimentary market economy, such as Afghanistan or North Korea. Increasing efficiencies developed, however, in the relation of state and economy, especially in the fields of fiscal and debt policies. Only in inflation policy, East European countries recovered slightly. In the socio-economic development, the Czech Republic and Slovenia were on top, followed by Hungary, Slovakia, and then Croatia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland with 8 points. At the bottom ranked Bulgaria, Latvia, and Romania. One of the virtues of the Bertelsmann indices of 4, 06, and 012 is that they do not restrict themselves to objective indicators in politics and economics, as did the older modernization theories, even Sartori's reinvention, for instance, on constitutional engineering. The policy revolution of an enlightened neo-institutionalism bears its intellectual fruits. The so-called management index was added to the status index of democracy, which included statehood, freedom of participation, legal statehood, institutional stability, integration by institutions of civil society. The management index dug into questions such as whether governments pursue consistent goal reforms, and that was important. The top management efforts in 2004 have been found in Estonia, Lithuania, Slovakia, and Slovenia. But Chile, Mali, Botswana, and Uruguay were between the 2 Baltic states and the 2 Central European countries, spoiled the European success story. In 2006, Slovenia and Slovakia were on top, above the 2 Baltic states. Croatia and Slovakia seem to be placed in 2004 on a fairly flattering position because the extraordinary efforts in raising the level of democracy in one group was Taiwan and Turkey. The chief editor, Werner Reichenfeld, did not fail to present the data to the EU. We can only hope that further accessions to the EU will not be decided on the basis of the Bertelsmann index, since we need further evidence for the readiness of the country to meet EU standards. The next accession planned in Croatia, a country that does well, even in the Bertelsmann indices, though it's coming into the European group, has not always been hailed by the international presence we just recently experienced. The management index became the spore of a new paradigm in transition studies. At the same time, it invited most of the criticism. Because the measure of efficiency over several years, a host of values judgments is necessarily endorsed by country specialists, who do not always share the same preferences, though they are bound to accept the basic concepts. The example of all new democracies caused caveats for the data. Only recently the EU discovered that Greece was systematically embellishing its data sent to Brussels, so the reliability of the data seems to correlate with the corruption index. If you put in table 5 with the status index of 2012, you see again the management index on the right side, if you can see it, that Estonia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Poland, Slovenia, and Czech Republic are very high. Scores Hungary went down drastically, as you can see, so the changes are considerable. Caution in cross-national comparisons is, however, appropriate. Otherwise, we would have to conclude that China was originally more successful than Hungary, because it is quickly progressing, whereas Hungary recently stagnated. About many developing countries, someone said, much movement, little progress. This is certainly not true of Eastern Europe. We know there is a dilemma from comparative studies on communism. At a time when Albania, for instance, owned one big factory and it built with Chinese help a second one, then they claimed to have an increase of 100%. So huge increases are sometimes only an indicator for a very small basis of starting points. We can see that the recognition of different starting conditions has correlated with the quantitative results as well. If you compare the figures in Table 5, we see several differences in the degree of development. The rule seems to be the less developed countries, with the exception of the Ukraine, the more political and economic transformations differ. In Latvia and some Balkan countries, economic performance is much better than the indicators on political transition. Especially telling with the management index. Czechia is on top in the status index, but far behind on the management index so far. My third chapter would be the civil society and justice as normative concepts and the indicator for failures in consolidation. Consolidation normally enumerates a host of variables influencing the development. But what is the independent variable? We rarely find one convincing variable to explain all success. It is more easily found for failure, for instance. Closest to an independent variable is civil society. But how do we measure it? Civil society was rediscovered by exponents of the velvet revolutions, such as Havel or Conrad. The breakdown of dictatorship, which happened most quickly in the type of bureaucratic communism as in the GDR and in Czechoslovakia, which seemed to be best equipped to suppress rebellions, according to the Chinese example on Tiananmen Square, was explained by the power of the idea of civil society. Even the ideologues of civil society in the West, like Cohen and Morocco, for instance, were inclined to keep the peaceful social movement clean of economic interests. But when the early Marx, for instance, knew that the idea has little chances against the interest, most civil society elites will have also this kind of experience that you need a kind of coincidence between big justice ideas and interests. Most civil society elites, with the exception of Havel, withdrew very quickly as soon as they came into the dirty jobs of everyday politics. Already Habermas saw that civil society is never secure. He analyzed three dangers. First, ethnic and populist groups try to usurp the notion of labor. Second, civil society groups grow into new power positions. The forum parties who used as a case of proof for this hypothesis in recent times. Most of them disintegrated or changed to a normal conservative party very quickly in many countries. And third, civil societies are used by powerful associations. Civil society has to remain autopoietic. In the words of Habermas, civil society can transform itself, but has to renounce global changes in the whole society. In the light of these insights, civil society turned into a concept which is used for two purposes. To explain the failure of consolidation of democracies in some countries, mostly former Soviet countries, and Albania and Serbia and Montenegro, or a normative idea of minimizing the effects of democracy in both regimes. New democracies on the road of final consolidation, as well as old democracy, which discover that there is no neat division between effective and non-effective democracy. Increasingly, we recognize only various degrees of deficiency. And Wolfgang Merkel underlined that, for instance, the opposite of effective democracy is hardly perfect democracy, as we in the West sometimes thought it was. Justice played a certain role in the debates around civil society. Justice became a kind of counter-concept against the communist ideological invocation of equality, especially social parties in the West and Eastern Europe. Normally include three basic values: liberty, justice, and solidarity. Justice has the advantage since Kant, who became the patron of recent debates on justice since John Rawls. that it is an absolute value. It cannot be relativized. Justice applies mostly to the legal state. Justice is a value for everybody in the exercise, and equality is only limited by national citizenships. There is an anomaly that the criminal citizens in some respects have more rights than an impeccable foreign as an immigrant into a country. In the social sphere, solidarity is the only notion which applies to the social context and has a human dimension. The Indian economist Sen has emphasized the necessity of participation and motivating citizens to participate. Justice has been understood of being distributed, and the postmodern debate, however, knows that positions which oppose redistribution as a consequence of justice. And in table 6, I have tried to give a kind of matrix in the debate on justice. You have distributive and redistributive theories, and you have liberalism and communitarianism as a kind of starting point. And then you find 4 groups of authors, which everybody knows who deals with transition to democracies. Neoliberals want only legal equality and freedom of contract on the market. They oppose any social state intervention. The market did not develop as a rational design, and therefore cannot be planned and steered. Rawls, on the other hand, does not think that the market can create social justice. Excess of the market is unequal, and inequalities for which the market is grounded. Therefore, the principle of justice and fairness has to work in favor of 2 devices. First, everybody should have the resources for his basic needs. Food stamps is not sufficient. And second, the change of rules has to respect the rule that the poorest of the society should not be affected by cuts. Consumers' taxes, highly problematic already in communist times. Value-added taxes, for instance, in Germany, are problems which we have to discuss. Michael Walzer, 83, did not think that there is a general logic of distribution. Every life sphere has its own rules of distribution, and no rule should overrule the other sphere. The basic values, health and education, should not be dependent on money and market rules. The community as a concept is closer to the social democratic solidarity concept than to the continuity of liberalism around us. Amartya Sen demands activation of men, and there are 2 concepts for him. First, instrumental liberties of self-realization for all societies, and second, constitutive liberty for developing countries. Freedom from disease, feeding and hunger, for instance, are here key indicators most frequently mentioned. They can be measured in life expectancies, infant mortality rates, education and social expenses per capita. The better developed democracy, the higher developed is also social science in the system, social justice in the system. All the East European countries fared much better than other developing areas. All the East European countries fared better than Africa, which was the last, and even Latin America. Even functioning democracies did not arrive to create more social justice in all cases. In East Asia, it is different, more social justice, more authoritarian regimes are combined. Though the authoritarian 4 little tigers have been contested in the social reforms. Problem in most former communist countries is that they want, the citizens want both liberties and social equality, which they normally attribute to a kind of democratic socialism after the model of Sweden, which is of course a misinterpretation. Sweden was in terms of state-owned industry, never on top. Even when West Germany was more socialist in that respect than Sweden. But the communist countries or citizens perceived it that way. That Sweden is a kind of idea they should get. That Sweden today is moving rather into the other direction and much more neoliberalizing was of course not yet known at that time. My fourth and last chapter is economic development, orientation towards the EU and corruption in East Central Europe. Increasingly, the group of new democracies which entered in 2004 has screened more carefully than the rest of the countries, remaining at best in the category of defective democracies or hybrid regimes. The anchoring function of the EU for prospective members was certainly the most important variable explaining successful consolidation in these countries. Slovakia and Estonia have enlarged the lessons, have learned the lessons from criticism of the European Council against their treatment, for instance, of the minorities. And they have improved, and I think they have taken a very hopeful development. Surveys show that EU members stayed in expectation of large parties of the population are wrong. They overlook that the EU is still a huge market and not yet a state, which intervenes in favor of their social security in order to guarantee something which I have already mentioned, kind of Swedish socialism. The data of Soho surveys shows that the support for Europe was initially high and went drastically down in 1997. In 2002, the figures rediscovered and the votes for the referendum, thanks to the propaganda of certain parties, which, with the exception of some post-communism and right-wing populists or regional and agrarian groups, in all 8 cases were above the last surveys, but only among those citizens who voted. Lithuania and Slovenia were the only countries where also a majority of those entitled to vote were mobilized for the referendum. If you would be kind enough to show the first geographic map, which I had. Yeah, here you see 3 degrees of approval during this, and you see on top in the favorable vote are Slovenia, Slovakia, and Lithuania. Do you have an idea why these 3 countries, which are far away from each other? In this country, this should be no secret, this is Catholicism. These are the most Catholic countries in the example. And the least support you find in the north by Estonia and Latvia. Again, why? Religion plays a certain role. They are Lutherans, and they have less commitment to West European values than the Catholic countries. And if you try the second map, because you could ask me where is Poland? Poland, after all, was always considered a very Catholic country. Then you see a very strange result. How are the votes in favor are distributed? Again, you see what you find in the others, that on the eastern borderline, there are very little supporters. But if you look at the supporter and their strongholds, then it's very interesting that something happened which Poland does not like. They tried to blur the frontier lines with former Germany between the 2 world wars. And now you've got almost exactly these frontier lines for support. Why? In some areas, as in Missouri, then you can of course argue the people have stayed here and they have a certain inclination towards the west. But in lower Silesia, this can also for Upper Silesia, but Pomerania and Silesia, lower Silesia, certainly does not belong, because here the development is completely new. Most people have not stayed here, which is certainly also true of Wrocław. Nevertheless, they are more in favor, though they came from Lviv or somewhere else, or Vilnius, in your case. Nevertheless, they are so pro-European. And I think that has something to do with this kind of experience of a loss of their own countries, and that they want to be linked to Europe in order to avoid that for the future. The management index suggests that success on the road to market society was a result also of good policies. And sometimes, however, Slovakia, compared to the Czech Republic with its backlashes, economic success, strangely enough, even under HR, who notoriously opposed negotiations with the EU. On the other hand, the example of Poland contradicts this statement. Early neoliberal decisions created favorable conditions for economic development. Low wages offered attractions for investors in both countries. The educational standards were high. Productivity, nevertheless, remained low. Infrastructure and capital are scarce. The EU supported these countries even before negotiations for integration and storage. Poland and Hungary were the first countries to get assistance for the reconstruction of their economy, which later was extended to all of the candidates for Europe. The help was raised to 1.6 billion ECU. If you look at table number 7, support for entering, then you have again, I have already commented on that the Catholic countries are stopped. So now table 8, maybe increase of gross domestic product in %. And if you look at the figures, the enormous breakdown of development, especially in the Baltic countries, in other new countries, after the dissolution of the former federation, for instance Slovenia and Slovakia, is notable. The Czech Republic was the only country which had a deterioration of her economy in 1998. In all countries after 2000, economic development was slowing down, and except Latvia and Estonia. The acceptance of the acquis communautaire of the EU entails costs for the Central East European economics and to spend regulations which were forced to defend the eastern borders of the economic systems in some countries, such as in Poland, for instance, caused also by losses to the foreign economy. Social justice was a good slogan, but without results, if corruption continues to be very high and endorses inequality. If you conclude and include the corruption data as a further indicator of measuring effect democracy, Transparency International offered a complicated picture. The first column, for instance, corruption is in the public sector is the abuse of public office. The second column asks for the institutions, the respondents, to have in mind also to eliminate corruption. The new democracies, which made an effort on the road to democracy, such as Slovakia, ranked by no means as high as in the Democracy Index. The corruption on the data, if you take number 8, show that increasingly the borderlines of new and old consolidated democracies are blurred. Two countries among the old systems In the EU, Italy are below Brazil, and Greece at the level of Thailand and Colombia. They rank below the high scorers of East European countries on the index of countries relatively clean of corruption, like Estonia, Slovenia, Poland, and Hungary. Belarus and Russia on this list are low scorers, which is in tune with the overall impression the respective economies for those social scientists who do not embellish the data for the new members of the community. In older indices, there was a second data set which measured subjective data on what citizens think about their institutions. These tables with respect to corruption are incomplete and hardly comparable. Parties, courts, and the police were identified as three areas with most of the need to be reformed. There was a serious lack of confidence in these institutions worldwide. Even in the cleanest country, Finland, with 38% of the citizens tend to believe that parties need further efforts to extinguish corruption. Bulgaria, Czech Republic, and Poland, Romania, and Russia, they got better votes than their citizens, a result of which is hardly believable in terms of objective data. Maybe these results are rather the proof that the parties are not yet considered as a major vehicle of decision, so that corruption concentrates on other institutions. The police high scorer in Russia, and the courts tend to be high scorer in Poland. This is very important, at least for the development of the Rechtsstaat of the legal state. I come to the conclusion and to the end. The concepts of transitology need area-specific adaptations. The tabula rasa approach for 1990 has been abandoned by transitology. The impact of precedents as a heritage of former communist countries was recognized. What the Soviets once так называемый was socialism, the old area specialists in the West played only a minor role. In the United States, for instance, many of those scholars who worked for a long time in quantitative research of the development of democracy all of a sudden went east and had not the slightest idea of what this Eastern culture were like. The first generation, you can say, of scholars, which was important, was people like Richard Rose, Herbert Kitchell, Hans-Dieter Klingemann. Many of them have never been east of East Berlin Wall until 1990, did not know any Eastern language, and had no idea about the history. But they found collaborators. And what I see as a great importance and a great success in the light of the reports you have just submitted, that a second generation is authentic, comes from these countries, knows the history and the language, and nevertheless is up to date with all the new and old paradigms of transitology. This is a very great hope for me for the future, and I can only hope that you continue. Thank you.
I may only say that when designing our summer school, we even couldn't dream about the contribution of Professor Klaus von Weimar, and this is the best what could happen during the very end of our summer school, and I think that this contribution will encourage all the participants of the summer school to be much more committed to methodological restrictions. So I think in the next edition of the summer school we will be forced when reminding this lecture to to be much more committed to some methodological restriction, as I told. And probably just to remind this conference and this moment would